Alright, right now it is, what day is it? I think it's May 9th. And right now it's 2:55 p.m. and we are going to continue with the biology video where I just talk about biology. And today I'm going to talk about biology book 2, and I'm going to be a little faster than yesterday because we have even more stuff to cover here. So, I have talked about cell cycle already, mitosis and meiosis. There's actually a difference between mitotic cell division and mitosis, because mitosis is actually mitotic cell division. Mitotic cell division is mitosis plus cytoplasmic division. So they are actually a little bit different. Let me check if I'm right. Let me check if I am right. Okay, it's called cytokinesis. Yeah. Mitosis and cytokinesis are two different things, and mitotic cell division is the full package. Alright, anyways, we're gonna start off today's video with the most beloved chapter in biology of all times. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but the most popular, the most widely adored chapter in biology: reproduction in humans. Starting off with something spicy. Yeah. First of all, let's look at men. They have pee-pee. I don't know if YouTube allows this, but whatever. It's science, okay? It's science. This is the pee-pee, and there are actually several glands before, yeah. So first of all, we have the testis, the ball sacks, and the testis produce sperms and male sex hormones, and on top of the testis, we have a layer of epididymis, which stores sperm temporarily, and the sperm sort of goes out with the vas deferens. The vas deferens is basically the sperm duct. The vas deferens, both sides of the vas deferens, they all go together in the prostate gland, which is also connected to seminal vesicles, which produces seminal fluid, which activates and nourishes sperms, provides a medium for the sperms to swim in, and neutralizes the acidity of a woman. Of a woman's and also another thing is connected to the prostate gland, and that is the urinary bladder, the bladder of piss. And so the prostate gland is directed to the shaft, and there is a urethra, not a ureter. A ureter is before the urinary bladder from the kidney. Don't mix that up. Okay, so we have urethra, and going through the urethra, we have Cowper's gland, and then it comes out. It comes out. So there we go. The pee-pee. This is how it looks sideways, and yeah. All right, let's talk about women. They have a vagina, yeah, and a lot of people, especially the young ones, think that babies grow in the vagina. Well, they're stupid. That's not the case. There's the vagina, and then there's a cervix, and on top of the cervix is the uterus. And it's the uterus where the embryo actually develops and the baby actually grows, the fetus. And in every 28 days, the uterine lining sheds, therefore menstruation, which sounds terrible. And then we have the uterus. It's like an inverted triangle, and it sort of connects to ovaries via the oviduct, where fertilization takes place. And ovaries are important as well because ovaries are responsible for ovulation, the releasing of ovums. All right. All right, now let's take a closer look to the gametes. We have a ball sac right here, and as you can see, it produces sperms, and we have sperms here. And for sperms, they have a flagellum, aka a tail, a midpiece, which usually contains mitochondria to provide them with energy because they gotta swim up. We have a nucleus, yep, and also an acrosome. And then we have ovaries. And the ovaries, they have follicles. When women are born, they already have follicles in their ovaries. So technically, the ova are very old. So yeah, they have a jelly coat, a cell membrane, and a nucleus and cytoplasm. The jelly coat hardens once a sperm head passes through it into the cell, and it cuts off the tail. And menstruation, I've talked about this in the electives video, but this is basically what menstruation is like. Every 28 days, ovulation, the ovum is released, and the ruptured follicle develops into a yellow body, secreting estrogen and progesterone. And here, I'm not going to show it to you, but this is sex. And here, this fertilization, where the sperm basically swims all the way up to the oviduct to fertilize with the ovum. And then after it's fertilized, it divides and differentiates, and the cell sort of sticks onto the lining, the wall of the uterine, as you can see right here, and it is implanted. Thus, it starts growing, and we have the placenta, where the embryo cell is implanted. And the placenta, it's sort of like a how do I explain it? Okay, first of all, we have amniotic fluid, which is incredibly important. It serves as a cushion to protect the embryo. It provides a stable environment. And we also have the placenta, which is where, I guess, where nutrients of the mom and the baby are exchanged. They cannot share the same blood vessels, because if they do, the baby's not going to be able to handle that, because there are a lot of toxins. This is how a fetus develops, basically. The heart and the spine is developed first. Yeah. And twins are possible, and this is how people give birth. And other stuff, condoms, very important, and all sorts of contraceptive methods. Oh god, that's I don't want to see that. That looks painful. All right, we're over with that. Let's talk about eyes and ears, detecting the environment. All right, so let's talk about there are multiple receptors in our bodies. We have eyes, ears, skin, nose, tongue, and let's talk about eyes first. Eyes are incredibly important. We see with eyes. This is a structure of an eye. An eye has 3 layers. An eye has 3 layers. The first layer has sclera, which is white in color, and we also have I have a more simplified version of this in my notebook. All right, here we go. So on the first layer, we have the sclera, which protects the eye and gives shape to the eye, and then we have a cornea to refract the light. And outside of the cornea, we have a layer of conjunctiva, which protects the cornea. And then in layer 2, we have a layer of choroid, which has black pigment to reduce reflection and are rich in blood capillaries. We have an iris, which controls the pupil size. The pupil is actually not a muscle or anything; it's just a hole. And we have aqueous humor between the lens and the cornea, we have aqueous humor. And between the lens and the back of the eye, we have vitreous humor. And behind the iris, we have ciliary bodies connected with suspensory ligaments and the lens, which controls if you want to look at near things, if you want to look at things that are close to your eyes, your lens must go from this to this. Well, that's very dramatic, but you get the point. When you're trying to look at something from far away, then you need to go from this to this. So the thickness or the degree of convexity of your lens is incredibly important. Layer 3, we have the retina, and we have a bunch of rod cells and cone cells, where yellow cells, cone cells, they are not as abundant as rod cells. They are the most abundant at the yellow spot, which is directly at the back of your eyeball, and they work best in high light intensity, and they are responsible for colors. That's why in very dark conditions you can't see colors really well, while rod cells let you look at objects. It's monochrome and it works best at dark conditions, but in bright conditions it works too, of course. And we have optic nerves, where all the rod cells and cone cells, after they detect light, they all come together to the back of the eye. That's why that spot is also called the blind spot, because in the optic nerves you don't have any rod cells or cone cells, because you need a spot in the eye to connect to your brain. So yeah. All right, I pretty much explained 2 concepts already, rod cells and cone cells, how they work, and blind spot, and how we look at near things and far away things. And I guess another thing I should mention is how eyes look in bright lights and dim lights. In dim lights, our pupils dilate. And the reason being is that the circular muscles relax and the radial muscles contract. So those are the iris, the muscles of the iris. So our pupils dilate in dark conditions and constrict in bright conditions. I've talked about focusing on near and distant objects, as you can see. Let's talk about color blindness a little bit. I'm not colorblind. I know someone in my class who's colorblind. Can't tell the difference between red and green. The most common kind of color blindness is the red-green color blindness, and both red and green look kind of brownish to them, but yeah. Anyways, let's talk about ears. I love ears. This is one of the better chapters in biology. We have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. Starting off with the outer ear, we have the pinna, also called the ear flap. These things, I used to ask a question a lot, where I ask, do birds have ears? Because they don't have this thing. But actually they do, but it's just a hole. Okay, anyway, pinna, and in the pinna we have an auditory canal, as you can see right here. And then it sort of connects to an eardrum. So originally it's all sound waves, and then it's converted into vibrations after it reaches the eardrums. And then we have 3 ear bones. The 3 ear bones, or ear ossicles. And then the ear bones are connected to semicircular canals via an oval window, and also the cochlea, because the semicircular canals aren't really for hearing, they are for body balance. And the cochlea, there's the exolymph and the endolymph. Looks like a spiral, Uzumaki vibes. And it's sort of, because of the vibration of the sound, the vibration is amplified by the ear bones, and there are sort of these hairs in the endolymph of the cochlea, and those hairs are stimulated to send nerve impulses via the auditory nerve. And then we have a eustachian tube, which is connected to the pharynx, and there's a round window down here. That is why on an airplane, when you're launching or landing, if you keep on swallowing your saliva, your ears are gonna feel crackled because you're trying to equalize your ear pressure. You know, when you're falling so fast or going up so fast, the pressure is whack, so you don't want that. All right, I'm feeling really it's really hot, goddamn. Okay, the inner ear, yes, I've talked about it. Exolymph, endolymph, you know the drill. And we're done with ears. One more thing to talk about is oxen. How plants detect light. So, there is an enzyme called an oxen in the tip top of the plant shoot and root in the stem cells. And once there is a unilateral light shining, okay, this is the top of the plant. There's a light shining from this side, then the oxens here will go to that side, will go to the dark side. So the dark side will grow even more, so the plant grows like this. It curves towards light. Yeah, that's basically the concept. Of course, it gets more complicated than that. You know, there are all sorts of investigation on how to prove oxen exists, how to prove that oxen goes to the dark side, to what degree, how it inhibits growth if there is too much, how it also promotes root growth, but in different concentrations in comparison to the shoot. You know, like this, and yeah. Let's talk about another one of my favorite chapters in biology, coordination in humans, aka new nervous system. We have a central nervous system and a peripheral nervous system. We're going to talk about central more, but hey, this is pretty cool. So let's talk about neurons, which are basically the longest cells in the human body. As you can see, they are incredibly long. We have the cell body first, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, dendron, dendrites. We have axon, which is this long thing, and around the axon we have myelin sheath, and from the axon it sort of branches out into synapses. There are different types of neurons, effector neurons, motor neurons, neurons in between, the inner neurons. We have a synapse here. As you can see, synapses are really important. It connects between neurons to neurons. So basically what happens in a synapse is that a nerve impulse arrives at the end of the axon, and the synaptic knob releases a chemical called the neurotransmitter, which is stored inside a vesicle. And then the vesicle travels to the edge of the cell membrane, to release the neurotransmitter, and the neurotransmitter diffuses across the synaptic cleft, and then to either another neuron or to a muscle to tell it to, hey, time to contract. And then now we have the central nervous system, and we need protection for that stuff. That's why in the brain we have a cranium, 3 membranes, and we have cerebrospinal fluid. Now the brain is separated into 3 parts. First of all, we have the big guy, the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the big guy. It's responsible for all sorts of things: association, memory, movements, anything voluntary. And then we have the and sensory, of course, as well. We have hearing center, speech center, we have vision center, you know, and then up next we have a cerebellum, which is a little smaller in the back of the brain. Not really the back, but sort of smaller in the middle, slightly to the back. And it's for muscle movement, coordination of muscle movements and maintaining body balance and all that stuff. So I don't need to think which leg to raise up when I walk. I don't need to think which muscle to move when I write my name, you know. You know, that's the thing, you know. Also, I forgot to mention that in the brain, in your cerebrum, the gray matter is outside, while the white matter is inside, and the gray matter is basically the nerve bodies, the cell bodies. Anyways, we have the spinal cord. Alright, I am back. this looks. Alright, this better. Alright, I'm back. Let's talk about the spinal cord. The difference between the spinal cord and the brain, the cerebrum, is that the gray matter is inside. The gray matter is inside, but the white matter is outside. And the white matter are the nerve fibers, but the gray matters, they are the nerve bodies, they are more on the inside. So what's up with the spinal cord is that it is responsible for reflex actions. So if somebody punches me in the face, my eye blinks. Okay, I can't do that now that I'm conscious of this. Or if I accidentally touch a sharp thing, I will retract my finger immediately. This is because spinal cord. The spinal cord is responsible for reflex actions. There's also another reflex action called the knee jerk, where if you hit the knee, your knees sort of go straight. And the signal of your effector neuron goes through the dorsal root. The dorsal meaning the back. And then it goes via your inner neuron to the ventral root, and also at the same time to your brain to signal that, okay, there is pain, there's something going on. That is why for a very, very, very brief nanosecond, you retract your hand first, and then you realize that you're in pain. So it is really, really cool. Yeah. Okay, yeah, this is the knee-jerk reflex. And that's pretty much all you need to know. There's a difference between involuntary action and reflex action. Like, yeah, we breathe constantly. Our brain is not going to suddenly decide to stop us from breathing. Our intercostal muscles and our diaphragm constantly contract and relax. They are involuntary. Doesn't mean they are reflex actions, okay? Because they keep on going forever. But reflex actions are more conditional, like a slap in the face. Oh, I blinked. Okay, a little bit about the endocrine system here. An endocrine system basically are a bunch of glands. And these glands, they release hormones into the blood. And in one person, there are usually 5 glands: pituitary gland, thyroid gland, adrenal gland, pancreas, and for me, testis; for women, ovaries. And the pituitary gland is the most important gland because it is the main gland. It controls the releases of hormones from other endocrine glands, so it's the father of all glands. So it's in the brain, sort of below the hypothalamus and above the medulla oblongata. I forgot to mention medulla oblongata, which is the part of the brain, the brainstem, that sort of controls, your breathing rate, your heart rate, and all that stuff. Thyroid gland, okay, I know this is out of syllabus, but there's a really cool diagram that I just want to show you all because it's so cool. I think it's this one. So these are all the hormones that are released by the pituitary gland. We have posterior and anterior. It appears that the anterior is the more important one, as you can see. But yeah, we have all sorts of proteins, growth hormones, FSH, follicle stimulating hormones if you're a woman, luteinizing hormones, prolactin, TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone, ACTH, adrenal cortico, I forgot, oxytocin, ADH. But yeah, this is really cool. The father of all glands. They release hormone to the blood without a duct. This is what makes them different from the exocrine glands, is that the exocrine glands have ducts, like pancreas. Pancreas secretes pancreatic juice via the pancreatic duct. Liver secretes bile via the bile duct and also the gallbladder. But glands, they directly release their hormones into the blood. And those hormones, they catalyze things. They don't react with anything, they catalyze things. Right, so we have the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland right here is for metabolic rate, growth, and development. The reason why we have fevers is because of the thyroid gland being like, oh shoot, there are, bacteria and virus in our bodies now. Let's make our bodies hotter so that maybe we can kill those bacteria and virus, even though it doesn't really work most of the time. So our thyroid gland releases a bunch of thyroxine and heat our body up to give us fever. Adrenal gland, which are on top of the kidneys, they release adrenaline, which is the hormone that makes us super nervous, intense, and afraid, in a fight or flight mode, very panicky. And we have pancreas, which very famously secretes insulin, because if you have too much blood glucose level, you're going to get diabetes. You don't want that. If you have too little glucose, you're not going to have enough energy. You're going to pass out. You don't want that. You want just the right amount of glucose in your blood, just the right concentration. And with testes and ovaries, which secretes all sorts of sexual hormones, which say you're a dude. Your balls release some of those hormones to make your voice a little deeper than a woman's. But that's, let's talk about bones. Bones. This is how a bone looks like. There are two heads of bones, and they are spongy bones. And then in the middle we have blood vessels, yellow bone marrow, and they're usually more compact, and they produce red blood cells and white blood cells. We also have cartilage, whoa. Cartilage are made up of living cells, and here we go. Bones are mostly calcium phosphate, but occasionally we get a bone cell, but they're not, concentrated or anything. Like occasionally we get a bone cell. Like, not occasionally, more like it's rare. Bones are not completely made up of bone cells. It's mostly made up of calcium phosphate, but there are bone cells. There are cartilage cells as well, and they reduce friction. They're soft, elastic. And we have a skeleton right here. There is the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton, and we have all sorts of joints. Let's talk about the axial first. Of course, we have the skull, which is important. Again, immovable joint. You don't want to move your skull. You don't want that. It's going to break your brain. We have vertebral column, which is the bone which supports the spinal cord. We have the rib cage, which is also really important because you want to protect your lungs and heart, because if you don't have lungs and heart, you can't live. All right, appendicular skeleton, limbs, arms, and legs. Pectoral girdle, and the other one, pelvis, something girdle, I forgot. Pelvic girdle. Okay, joints. Here's what a joint looks like, right? We have a few things going on. First of all, we have the ligament in between two bones to hold them together, prevent dislocation. With cartilage, of course, I've talked about it, absorbs shock, reduces friction. And we have synovial membrane, which is enclosed by a fibrous capsule, and in the synovial membrane we have synovial fluid, reduces friction, and nourishes the cartilage cells. There are two kinds of joints, right? The hinge joint and the ball joint. Okay. For the hinge joint, it's you can only move in one plane, like my arm. Like, I can't move my arm sideways right now because it's a hinge joint. And then we have a ball and socket joint, which means you can move in any directions you want. So here are the differences. Again, there are immovable joints. And then afterwards, we will be moving over to muscles. Muscles have dark bands and light bands. That's why they can contract and relax, because they do this. This is how muscles look like when they contract. There are smooth muscles and cardiac muscles. Smooth muscles are usually spindle-shaped and have no striations, while cardiac muscles are very branched and striated. And there are different kinds of muscles, basically. All right. Transmission of pulling force. You need to know what's going on. So when we contract our arm, there is a bicep and there is a tricep. And okay, when you lift your arm, you can flex your bicep but not your tricep, because the tricep is the extensor. Okay, so when you contract the extensor, it extends your arms and turns it straight. So that's a flexor extensor relationship. And also you can apply the lever principle. Alright, I have talked about stuff. Oh, again, of course, synapses to signal the muscles to contract. Okay, at the end we have homeostasis, which I've already briefly talked about. Homeostasis, there's an entire book on homeostasis that I've gone through already, but basically homeostasis is the balance of some of the elements of your body, like body temperature, water content, gas content, and glucose level. I'm going to be brief here. For body temperature, thyroxine. For water content, ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. For gas content, we actually don't have a specific hormone for that, but if our medulla oblongata detected that, oh, we have too much carbon dioxide in our blood vessels, a little too acidic, don't you think? We're gonna breathe more to release more carbon dioxide. And for glucose level, we have the famous insulin. This is the negative feedback mechanism. So if there is too much blood glucose, then it's going to be detected by the receptor in the control center of your brain. It's going to be detected by your blood glucose. It's going to be detected by, I think, the chemoreceptors. Yeah, and on the pancreas. So the pancreas secretes more insulin, less glucagon if there is too much glucose. If on the other hand, too little glucose concentration, it's going to secrete more glucagon, secrete less insulin. So glucagon converts glycogen to glucose again, but they're not perfectly opposite, because some glycogen stored in the muscles cannot be converted back into glucose anymore. All right, but anyway. Hey, we finished book 2. Now let's move over to the one and only book 3. Starting off, we have probably my favorite chapter in biology of all times, and that is biodiversity. And oh boy, I love this. So to explain what's going on, there are 7 levels. If you want to classify in a living organism, we have a kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. I got them right. And to name these organisms, there are 2 names, the genus name and the species name. This is called the binomial system, as you can see right here. And alright. Yeah, sometimes you don't have to give it a species name sometimes, like you can just make up a name if you discover an animal for some reason. The classification of the kingdoms are different throughout time, and the kingdoms are Eubacteria, Archaebacteria, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. There are 6 kingdoms. Am I missing one? I don't think I'm missing one. Okay. Now, I have some notes which I think is going to be of great help if I show you, even though it's a mess, but I mean, you gotta take a look at this, man. You gotta take a look at this. right here. Right here. Yeah? And you can see right here, eubacteria, archaebacteria, both of them are also prokaryotes, while eubacteria, archaebacteria, and protista are unicellular, meaning that they are organisms that are one cell. They are one cell. But there's a difference between prokaryote and unicellular, is that for prokaryotes, they don't have a nucleus, meaning that they don't have DNA, they have RNA. They even have plasmids sometimes, which are basically unimportant DNAs. A prokaryote, they have cell wall, but they don't really have any cell organelles like, a chloroplast or a mitochondria. And protista, they are eukaryotes, meaning that they have DNA, they have cell organelles. Look at algae. They have or algae, algae. They have chloroplasts, very likely. Yet they're unicellular. And then we have fungi, plants, and animals. They are eukaryotes, and they are multicellular as well. All right. There's this one photo of a monkey, which is so funny. I laughed at it for many days straight because it's such an ugly looking monkey. And it's this one. It's so ugly. I want to punch it in its face and hug it and cuddle with it. All right. Humans, chimpanzees, monkeys, we're all animals. We're all chordates, meaning that we have spines. There are like 35 phylums last time I checked it. Maybe there's more now. But, most animals actually don't have spines. They don't have cords in their back, especially for insects. Spiders, mollusks like snails and starfish. Brachiopods, which I think are seashells and all that stuff. I did write about the phylums a little bit on my notebook. We have Cnidaria, mollusks, arthropoda, which are insects, arachnida, separate phylum for spiders. We have other kinds, 35 kinds, but the most common kind, chordata, meaning we have spines. And you can actually separate the okay, let's talk about some other stuff before we fuck. All right, first off, we have eubacteria. For eubacteria, we have a circular strand of DNA, so not really RNA, but still, no nucleus, lame. We have a cell wall, a capsule, cytoplasm. We have cell membrane though, and we have flagellum, very likely. And there are three kinds of eubacteria: the rod kind, the sphere kind, and the spiral kind. Pylori. The rod kinds are so the rod kinds are coli, so E. coli, very famous. And then we have the sphere kinds, the aureus kinds, the Staphylococcus aureus. And then we have the pylori kind, Helicobacter pylori, very famous. All right. Next up, we have archaebacteria, which are bacteria that are more ancient. There is actually a difference between eubacteria and bacteria. And this kind of bacteria, most of them have cell walls, but their chemical composition is unique. So we don't know that. Scientists know that, but we don't know that. Apparently all of the last names of archaebacteria are just archaea because it's such a weird, obscure kingdom, and they live in extreme environments. Okay. Next up, we have protista. There are three kinds of protista, as you can see. The first kind right here are protozoans, such as amoeba, and then we have algae, the good kind, and then we have slime mold, the gross kind. That's all you need to know. Up next, we have the fungi, aka mushrooms. I love mushrooms, but yeah, they're strange. Okay, so they have um roots, but they're actually not roots. They are rhizoids. Are they rhizoids? I think they are. Right, they're rhizoids. And they carry out parasitic nutrition, which means they host, and they have a hyphae and then a sporangium for yeast. And for a real big mushroom, so yeast is unicellular, but other kinds of mushrooms are multicellular. And for other kinds of mushrooms, they have mycelium, um, which is made up of a lot of hyphae. All right, plants. There are many kinds of plants. We have non-vascular plants like moss, and for vascular plants we have ferns, we have conifers, and then we have flowering plants, which can be divided to monocots and dicots. For moss, they have spores, and they have rhizoids as well, and yeah, that's all you need to know. They have chlorophyll too, but they don't have real roots. For vascular plants like ferns, they have this thing which stores which is a kind of fiddlehead, and they have spores as well. And ferns look like this. And then we have conifers, which are like tall trees like pines and all that. They have needle-shaped leaves usually, and they produce naked seeds like pine cones. And those pine cones, they blow up, and the seeds they just go everywhere. For flowering plants, we have dicots and tricots. The difference between a dicot and a tricot is that a dicot have a network of veins, while the monocots have parallel veins. And usually the dicots have more numbers of petals, flower petals. And of course, they have 2 cotyledons instead of 1. Animals. I don't have much time, but here are some animals. And then we have all sorts of animals like fish, amphibians, and reptiles. All 3 of them are poikilotherms, aka cold body temperature animals. And they have external fertilization. Fish have gills, fins, and slimy scales. While amphibians have moist, naked skin. Then we have reptiles, of course. For reptiles, they actually have lungs, not gills. They have dry, hard scales for their bodies, and they carry out internal fertilization, actually, which a lot of people don't know. So, snake is a kind of reptiles, and snakes don't lay eggs. Oh, no, they do. Reptiles lay eggs. Yeah, but they are fertilized inside the body. Birds have lungs, they have wings, they have feathers, they don't have teeth. Ha! Joke's on you, but they have a strong beak. And not all of them can fly, like penguins. For mammals, they have lungs, hair, they have pinny, and they have mammary glands as well, so they produce milk. Yeah, they're homoeotherms, so they are warm body temperature animals. Anyways, check out this Dichomous Key, where you can look at some characteristics of the appearances of the organisms and classify them with the help of a Dichomous Key. Okay, no storage space. Okay, so I'm back, and let's talk about ecosystems. This is a huge chapter. Okay, levels of organizations in ecosystems, even though doesn't really matter that much, but a species, population, community, and afterwards we have ecosystem, biome, and biosphere, which is basically the Earth. Here are some features of an ecosystem. There's an energy flow, animals interact, there are cycles of materials, which I will talk about later. Here are some major ecosystems of Hong Kong, but of course, if you're watching it, you're probably not interested in that. Neither am I. Hong Kong is not a very cool place. If you're the kind of traveler or the kind of tourist who wants to, look at the nature, look at the countryside, Hong Kong is not not your choice. Let me tell you that much. Ambiotic factors of ecosystem. Now we're talking. So there are many kinds of habitats, as you can see. If you play Minecraft, there are many biomes. So the mesa is my favorite. The tundra, the savanna, the meadows, the swamps, the jungles, the deserts, and we have all sorts of habitats. The sky is a habitat, right? Mountains, hills, extreme hills. Polar regions, we have deserts, beaches, volcanoes, oceans, swamps, grassland, rocky shore, rainforests, and there are different factors of an ecosystem that changes how organisms behave, like the temperature, like homoeotherms, like mammals and birds. They can maintain a constant body temperature. So penguins can penguins are not like bears. You've seen bears. They can be in very extreme conditions and they're fine. And we have elephants, which are also mammals. They have huge ears to release heat. There's that. And then of course we have for plants, if the weather is too hot, the leaves becomes needle shaped and curled up. Their stomata are sunken. And they have waxy cuticle to prevent heat loss, and they have succulent stem to collect as much water as possible, thus a cactus. For light, some animals are diurnal, like us, and some are nocturnal, and there are many different factors to light as well. Light intensity, the color or the quality of light, the direction, and the photoperiod. So in dark conditions, like bats, they can see in the dark. Oh my goodness, I am insane. Bats they don't see, right? The bats, they don't see. They emit an ultrasound, and they can judge their location based on the reflection of that ultrasound. Rainfall and humidity. Wind speed. So some plants make good use of the wind, like dandelions. And water current. If the water current is super high, the barnacles, they sort of stick onto the side of the rock, so they will not get washed away easily. That's another adaptive feature. Salinity is really important. There's a kind of plants called halophytes, and their plant surfaces, they're really waxy because they don't want salt to go into them at all, because osmosis. Oxygen concentration is really important as well. Soil properties, including soil pH, the particle size, and the amount of humus. And then afterwards, let's talk about the basic community of an ecosystem. There are niche, habitat, there are species, diversity. Sometimes a community has a dominant species. Now, different organisms in a community interact with one another in different ways. We have predation, plus minus, so one organism gains and one organism loses. And this is the population chart of prey and predator. As you can see, it's sort of it's different, and there's a wave of sorts. Now this is the explanation. So basically, there's a lot of prey, there's a lot of predators. So the predators, they eat up all the prey, and they starve. Now all the preys are gone. Not all, but the population of the preys are low. But since they ran out of food, their population become lower. But because their population become lower, now more preys can reproduce because no one's eating them. But that's basically the basic concept. Competition, it sucks for both organisms. It's terrible. Don't do that. There's the intraspecific competition, and there's the interspecific competition. Symbiosis, it's a very funny haha explosion. Plus 0 is the commensalism. Like barnacles living on the body of whales. The whales, they chillin', but the barnacles, they can go to different regions, so it's cool. Oh, look, this is really funny. A bird standing on top of an ox. My favorite, of course, is mutualism, because both organisms gain something. Yeah, like the sea anemone and the hermit crab working together. And the crab can bring the anemone everywhere, while the anemone protects the crab. And then we have parasitism, which is disgusting. Oh, fuck. I don't want to look at that. I do not want to look at that. Let's talk about primary succession then, where originally we only have a barren rock, and then lichens start to form. With lichens, they are the pioneer community, and more organic matter accumulates because lichen is basically the first kind of species to colonize a barren area. Since there are more organic matters, ferns, moss, and grass can grow, thus trees can grow, and then we have humus, which means shrubs can grow, shrubs and trees. And when the soil becomes thick and rich, more trees can grow, and there's a climax community. And yeah, and then there's a secondary succession, where it's like a forest fire. After a forest fire, what happens then? There are already some grass or some naked seeds on the ground already, because the fire probably can't burn away the naked seeds. So the pioneer community of lichens is not needed. Okay, energy flow in an ecosystem. How does energy flow? So as you can see, the grass consumes sunlight. Rabbits eat grass. Deers eat rabbit. Wolves. What the heck? Wolves eat rabbits, and yeah, so on and so forth. So there's a food chain. Everybody knows what's a food chain. There are decomposers. Some mushrooms are decomposers. They decompose organic matter. And there's a food web. Not only food chain, but food web. It's possible as well. And there's a primary consumer, a secondary consumer. There's a producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. And this is how the energy sort of flows. So the energy flow in the beginning is a lot, right? And then it gets less and less and less, because heat is really heat loss to respiration, all that stuff. But once you consume food, there's a lot of energy, especially for a bioaccumulation. I think it's not in the core syllabus, but like, say, a piece of small fish accidentally consumed mercury. A big fish eat a lot of small fish. We eat a lot of big fish, so now we have a lot of mercury in our bodies. That's not good. Okay, pyramids of numbers. As you can see, a lot of grass. 70,000 grasshoppers eat all the grass. 35,000 toads eat all the grasshoppers, and one eagle eats 35,000 toads. But sometimes the pyramid can be upside down, like a lot of caterpillars on one tree. And then we have the biomass, like a huge oak tree, and some caterpillars and one small bird. And it can be upside down as well, as you can see. At the end, we have the carbon cycle, which is incredibly important. You know the carbon cycle, you know the drill. Animals release them. Plants, they both consume and release them, because they conduct both photosynthesis and respiration. With factories, limestone, and all that stuff. The real juice, though, is the nitrogen cycle. Yeah, the nitrogen cycle. So basically, plants consume nitrogen by feeding. You know, they eat food that has nitrogen in them, and then afterwards, plants and animals, they produce organic waste and dead bodies, and they decompose into ammonium compounds by the decomposers. And then afterwards, there are nitrifying bacteria turning ammonium compounds into nitrites and nitrates. And afterwards, the nitrates, they can be taken up by plants, And they can also be denitrified into the nitrogen gas in soil and in the atmosphere. And also the nitrogen gas in the soil can be fixed into trees, nitrogen-fixing bacteria, also known as root nodules. You can find root nodules in peanuts, yada yada. And we have lightning, which also produces nitrogen oxides, and this is the nitrogen cycle. So yeah, I always forget about root nodules, but yeah, this is a more simplified version of the nitrogen cycle. Thought you guys may want to check that out. I told you it's a huge chapter. I'm talking about it for 12 minutes. At the end, how do we conserve ecosystems, and how do we measure the distribution of ecosystems? There are two ways actually, but you can combine them both. First way is a quadrant. I've used it before in the middle of a river, and this is a 1 meter by 1 meter plastic square. You put it down and you count the organisms in the square. Yeah. And then we have a transect, which can be used to find the distribution of certain multiple organisms in a transect. And there are belt transects, which is basically a mix of both quadrants and transects. And I think that's it. I think we have finally covered all the stuff in ecosystems. Let's move over to the rest of book 3. Now, for book 3, there is photosynthesis and respiration, but I've already talked about that. And there is also infectious diseases and immune system, which is actually the last chapter we've ever studied. So actually, I'm gonna go ahead and move over to book 4. Book 4, as you can see. All right, book 4. So what's in book 4? Genetics, and evolution, as well as biotechnology. And there's another separate book about biotechnology. I highly recommend you all to check that video out. All right, so I have a lot of assignments here. I'm gonna temporarily remove them. All right, genetics. Genetics are important. They are the basic unit of life. They are the code of living. All right. So this is how a DNA looks like. Well, a strand of DNA, basically. We have the polynucleotide. We have the peptide backbone. And we have sugar. And the peptide backbone is basically, there's a phosphate group. And there's a nitrogenous base. And there are 4 kinds of base. The ATCG, if you're talking about DNA, the adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And for RNA, there's no T, there's no thymine. It's uracil, so AUCG. And the DNA is 2-stranded, bonded by hydrogen bond, twirled into a double helix, while RNA is just 1 strand. So as you can see, we have the sugar phosphate backbone, and they're complementary. The way they form DNA, they are complementary. So an A is complementary to a T, while a C is complementary to a G, and vice versa. This is really important, by the way. Okay, so I think I have a really good illustration of what is what when it comes to genetics. Right here, yeah, it's a mess, but right here, in the nucleus we have chromatin, and the chromatin, they form chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs, but chromosomes itself is like an X, and one side of the X is a chromatid, and together they are sister chromatids, and together in the middle there's a centromere, and when they cross over, there is a chiasma, and 2 pairs of homologous chromosomes. In the meiosis, it's called a bivalent. Okay, let's return. So we have a chromosome, and chromosomes are basically a bunch of DNA together, and we have alleles as well in pairs, of course, because again, sister chromatids. Am I right? So we have alleles, and these alleles are really, really, really important. All right, I believe I have okay, there we go. This is good shit. A basic genetic diagram looks like this. So here's the parents. There's the male and the female. They reproduce and they have different gametes. Gametes, as you can see, like, okay, so say I have a tall nose bridge, as you can see, but usually Asians don't have a tall nose bridge. So say I and my brother, I have a tall nose bridge. My brother do not. And both of my parents have short nose bridges, which means that one of my parents, hypothetical, all of this is hypothetical, one of my parents must carry the gene for tall nose bridge. But because both of my parents are also short nose bridged, it means that the tall nose bridge gene is covered, is masked over by the short nose bridged gene, meaning that the tall nose bridged gene, the allele is recessive and the short nose bridged is dominant. But you know, it's all hypothetical. So we have Mendel's law of inheritance. That's one of the laws, the dominance. SID, segregation, independent assortment, and dominance. For segregation, basically the paternal and maternal gametes, they separate. And for independent assortment, it's all random how they all come back together. So again, look at this. There are 4 possible gametes. There are 4 gametes, and there are 4 possible outcomes. And your child, your offspring, can be any one of them, any one of the 4. And there are multiple ways. Okay, so in here we have incomplete dominance. Yeah, there's a codominance and there's an incomplete dominance, like a red flower and a white flower. If they cross-pollinate, okay, so let's say red is dominant. So, okay, their offspring very likely to be red. But no, what if incomplete dominance? Then what's going on? Then it's going to be pink. And for codominance, it's going to be red and white together. So yeah, more genetic diagrams for you to check out. More genetic diagrams. Let me show you one genetic diagram I spent an entire hour to draw. In this case, use a Punnett square. It's way more efficient because now we have 8 gametes, 16 gametes. Again, you can determine the sex of humans by looking at the 23rd pair, XX versus XY versus XX. I'm an XY, as you can see. Some alleles are linked with sex, like again, color blindness is X-linked. Some of them are Y-linked, but this is too complicated, so you don't want to study that. There is the difference between continuous variation and discontinuous variation, like how tall are you versus if you can roll your tongue. And at the end we have there should be a page which is about Down syndrome and all that stuff. Anyways, let's talk about molecular genetics. So there are 2 things you need to learn: transcription and translation. So for transcription, the DNA is broken apart because of DNA polymerase, and it becomes 2 parts, right? The template strand and the coding strand. So the coding strand and the template strand, and suddenly another string of mRNA comes here and forms another strand, which is identical as the coding strand, but different, complementary as the template strand. So mRNA, it's a little more complicated than that, because we have mRNA in here, basically a strand of RNA, a strand of sugar backbone, a sugar phosphate backbone, and we have all sorts of free nucleotides. And because of RNA polymerase, these base nucleotides, they all come together and form a complementary chain. Afterwards, the chain of mRNA is passed through a ribosome attached on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, sort of passing through. And as they pass through these things called tRNA, they all join the ribosome and then leave. But once they leave, because they're connected to an amino acid molecule, when they leave, they don't have the amino acid molecule, which means it's like knitting. You can actually form a chain of amino acids, and this becomes a peptide chain and also a primary protein. So there is that. Mutations are a thing, and you don't want that. There are 4 kinds of mutations. When mutation happens, the nucleotide bases in your DNA sequence swapped. Either that or an entire chunk of DNA in your chromosome swapped positions. So there are deletion, insertion, substitution, and inversion. Deletion and insertion are the worst, because if one base is deleted or inserted, then the entire sequence is fucked. Because when the tRNA comes to, okay, say this is the tRNA and it is attached to an amino acid, and this is the mRNA, and it passes through, and say on this thing we have an ACA. What is the complementary of ACA? UGU. So a tRNA with UGU attached to an amino acid is gonna see this and poop, match it, and now it moves on, and now we have this amino acid. So it's 3 by 3 by 3. But if one more base or one base is deleted or inserted, then the entire sequence is going to shift. Then your entire chain, your entire protein is completely useless. So you don't want that. You don't want that at all. You're gonna get cancer from that. So yeah, again, chromosomal mutations, and yeah. Okay, at the end, an extra chromosome means Down syndrome. You can also get Turner syndrome. If you have no Y, only one chromosome, and you're 23rd, you can get Klinefelter syndrome. If you have an extra X, XXY is boy, XYY is also a boy, by the way, but XXY is more feminine, and XYY is too masculine. And mutagens, don't smoke. Also, speaking of mutagens, radiation is a kind of mutagen, so if you are exposed to a lot of radiation, it's very likely that you're gonna get cancer, and you don't want that. Radiation, bad. Have you seen Chernobyl? Next chapter 28. Biotechnology. And I have done another video talking about biotechnology and homeostasis. You can check that one out, but I'm going to be a little more brief here. This is recombinant DNA. Recombinant DNA. So in biotechnology, you want to combine different things and be kind of experimental and create and program your own DNA because that's cool. You need a donor cell. Take the cell, take the gene of interest in that cell, chop it up with the same restriction enzyme, and then get a plasmid from a bacterium and cut that with the same restriction enzyme, and then recombine it, and then using heat shock or electric shock, put it back into the bacterium, and then either let the bacterium incubate or straight up try to infect the body cells. Yeah, that's it. There are a lot of applications of biotechnology. You can also do a DNA fingerprinting, which is really cool, really fun. Haha, explosion. There we go. Gel electrophoresis. And I've talked about this again. Check out another video where I explain the principles, the applications of gel electrophoresis. Okay, let's talk about evolution. Chapter 29. So for evolution, there are two chapters, Evolution 1 and Evolution 2. But basically, to sum up evolution 1, animals and plants and organisms, they change. And from the start, but from the start, life is just one single-celled bacteria. But it evolves, and of course, given that I've just talked about biodiversity, the bacteria evolves into, protista, fungi, plants, and animals. They evolve, evolution, and there are evidence for the evolution, and those things are fossil fuels. There are two kinds of fossil fuels: body fossils and trace fossils. Fossils are formed by sedimentation after ancient organisms, die and petrify and are stuffed with minerals and sedimentation and all that stuff. And the reason why fossils are exposed is because there are earthquakes and the entire plate, the crust of the earth, shift. So some fossils here is exposed to the atmosphere. Again, animals evolve. Their bones can become longer. They can become shorter. Yada yada. Oh, it's the monkey again. You can also look at evolution by looking at homologous structures, like whales and birds. It looks like whales have fins and bats have wings, but actually they are just fingers, but shaped strangely. And this is the phylogenetic relationship tree, and we need to know how to draw that. There's a more simple way to draw that, evolution 1, here we go. For evolution 2, we talk about the mechanism of evolution. Why do we evolve? First of all, we have Lamarck's theory, where environmental changes make animals evolve. Like a bunch of giraffes want to eat apples from tall trees, then it's not apples, I guess. Fruits from tall trees, and they try to reach those fruits. That's why their necks become longer. But actually, he's kind of wrong. Darwin says that there is a kind of natural selection. So this is Darwin, and this is natural selection. So natural selection is basically because we mutate, because mutations happen and genetic variations happen. So maybe a long time ago. Look at this one. A very simple example. A long time ago, most bugs are white in color. Because the tree trunks are white, and then the tree trunks start to become black, and so now they're exposed. So now the birds can see those bugs and eat those white bugs. Now it sounds like I'm racial profiling. I'm not. Basically, the white bugs, they're exposed because of the dark trunk background, so the birds eat all the white bugs. But the black bugs, they are hidden because of camouflage, and the birds don't eat them. That is why the black bugs are safe and they can reproduce. That's why there are more and more black bugs. Same goes for insecticide-resistant insects. Because insecticides kill all the insects who cannot resist insecticides. So the insects which can resist insecticides reproduce way better because less competition, thus they evolve. Speciation involves three things: mutation, geographical isolation, and natural selection. like a mountain, right? A mountain. And before there's no mountain, it's a flat land, and both organisms are chilling. They're both chilling, and they're the same kind. Suddenly there's a mountain in between these two organisms. And even though they're the same, one side of the mountain receives a lot of rain, one side receives no rain. So this one evolves to be a little more adaptive to dry environments than this one, which evolves to adapt to more wet environments. After millions of years, they come back together, they reproduce, and their offspring is not fertile because they are already different species. But yeah, there is that. And I have gone over book 4. So hip hip hooray. Returning to book 3, we still have the infectious diseases and the non-infectious diseases that we would like to talk about. So let's start off with infectious diseases. As you can see, a bunch of kids are drinking water from a very muddy river. You don't want to do that. It's not healthy. The river contains a lot of germs. There are many different types of diseases. As you can see, there are infectious diseases and non-infectious diseases. Non-infectious diseases include, skin cancer, scurvy, cataract, and you get those diseases because of genetic factors, biological factors, behavioral factors. But infectious diseases mean that there's an invasion of pathogens in your body. So this is a virus, now more relevant than ever. There's a nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA. There's a protein code. There's an envelope, yada yada. There's another elective subject called microorganisms that we're not going to study because it's too tough. But yeah, and then we have bacteria, which are actually alive. Viruses are not alive. Even though they contain DNA, they are not alive. Remember that. Bacteria, though, are alive. Sometimes chemicals, they can be pathogens as well, like prions, which can attack your brain. So there are many different ways to transmit diseases: by droplets, like saliva, sweat; by air, which is dangerous, like the corona; by water; by food; and by body fluids, like hepatitis; and vectors, like insects, especially mosquitoes. And we ought to prevent that. We ought to prevent that stuff. You don't want that. Nope. All right, chapter 24. Non-infectious diseases. Cancer. There are two kinds of tumors. There is the benign tumor, and then there's the malignant tumor. The benign tumor is friendly, though you don't want that either, because they have a fibrous capsule. There's a bunch of tumor cell, but it doesn't really do anything. And then we have the malignant tumor, aka cancer. So one cell malfunctions because the wrong protein is produced, and now the cell is fucked. And the cell keeps on dividing, even though it's fucked. And it divides, and it divides, and it reaches into your blood vessels, and it goes around your entire body via your blood vessels, which is horrifying. Horrifying. You can treat cancer with surgery by cutting off the tumors, but if you're in stage 4, then it's probably everywhere. The tumors are probably everywhere. Radiotherapy, which is a little paradoxical because you may accidentally create more cancer, and also chemotherapy, but it doesn't really work all that well. So yeah, cancer is not good. You don't want to have cancer. Again, carcinogens, mutagens: tar, nitrosamine, best dose, UV light and sunlight, X-ray, a human papillomavirus, aka cervical cancer virus, and hepatitis, they all lead to cancer. And to prevent cancer, you can actually eat tomatoes. Tomatoes, they contain lycopene, which can help prevent cancer. But just because you are preventing cancer, it doesn't mean you have 0% chance of getting it. You still have a small chance of getting cancer, even if you're healthy. So, it's luck. At the end of the day, it's all about luck. All right, cardiovascular diseases. Basically blood clot. And to treat it, you can put a mesh and try to keep the mesh open to prevent your blood vessels to get fat and get stuck. Yeah. And the factors for coronary heart disease include family history, aging, unhealthy lifestyles like smoking, eating fat foods all the time, and not exercising like me, but I don't eat that much fat foods. I'm a skinny boy. Next, diabetes. There are two kinds of diabetes. Type 1, I give too little or no insulin. Type 2, you have insulin, but your body cells are not reacting. Type 1 is better because at least you know how to cure it by injecting insulin. But for type 2, no. Type 1 diabetes, family history. But type 2 diabetes can be a result of aging, obesity, and a lack of exercise. And that's all you need to know. Now, at the very, 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 very end, we have the one and only immune system. Now, in the immune system, there are different physical barriers and chemical barriers in your body. Skin is one. Tears, saliva, sebum, the oil secreted from your skin, and gastric juice. There are all sorts of physical and chemical barriers. Hair in your nose as well. But we also have blood clotting. When you get hurt, a cut, a scratch, you're bleeding, what's going to happen is that there are going to be blood vessels. A lot of red blood cells is going to be supplied. We have fibrin to patch them up. We have white blood cells to attack all the phagocytes and blood platelets. Tissue fluid is going to accumulate, and because there's a lot of tissue fluid in there, your pain receptor is going to feel that, thus feeling pain, and it's going to look red as well because of vasodilation. Now we will talk about the one and only specific defense mechanism. This is going to be the thumbnail, or maybe not. I'll choose some cool ass biological diagram thumbnails. But there are two kinds of white blood cells. There are the phagocytes and lymphocytes. Phagocytes, they are dumb. If there are any foreign pathogens entering and invading your body, pathogens go there and eat them all. But if you are smart, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a macrophage which recognizes the antigen of that pathogen, and the macrophage is going to carry that antigen and activate it and be activated, and it's going to present that antigen to the T helper cell. Now the T helper cell is activated. The T helper cell is going to activate other cells like T cells and B cells, which leads to two entirely different ways to protect your body against invading pathogens. For B cells, it is the humoral immune response, the softer one, the kinder kind. The B cells, they differentiate into plasma cells that contain antibodies. Antibodies, they can stick to antigens. They're like this, they're a fork, and they can stick to antigens and rip the pathogens apart, because pathogens are, okay, here we go. These are pathogens and these are antibodies. The antibodies, they stick to the pathogens, right? And they rip them apart, thus breaking it. And you can also agglutinate by sticking them all together and then be swallowed by the pathogen. Or you can also do this. The antibodies act as antitoxins, and they sort of stick to the toxins and be swallowed by the phagocyte. And then we have T cells, which is the mean kind of cell, the cell-mediated immune response. A T cell can activate the killer T cell, the suppressor T cell, and the memory T cell. There are both memory B cells and T cells. They remember the antigen, and they know which kind of antibodies to produce to prepare for the second invasion. But for killer T cells, instead of attacking the pathogens, they straight up attack the infected cells in your body and completely ruin it. So there's that. T cells also secrete lymphokines to activate phagocytes. So that's cool. Yeah, again, first invasion, second invasion, which is way stronger because you have developed a memory. Vaccines. A lot of people think vaccines are dumb and useless. Well, they are wrong, because vaccines are not actually viruses or bacterium. They are actually either deactivated pathogens or killed pathogens or just antigens. And if you put antigens in your body can give an immune response and react to it, but the pathogen itself, it's not there. It's dead. It's gone. It's not going to release some DNA and mess up your own body cells, okay? It's gone. But there are antigens, so your body is going to recognize the antigens and know which antibodies to produce to prepare yourself in case you get invaded by the real thing. So vaccines actually work. Okay, there's a difference between passive immunity and active immunity. Passive immunity is basically antibodies, injected in your body. So if you're a baby and you can't really produce antibodies, your mom is going to provide you with antibodies through the placenta. And then we have active, where your body creates your own antibodies. But basically there's that. We have covered the entire biology syllabus, and thanks for watching. I am extremely tired right now, and I will be doing 4 biology papers right now.